The cold up here is not like any cold you have felt before. It does not simply surround you, it enters you. It claims ownership of your bones, your blood, your breath. I have not felt truly warm in 11 years. Not since I descended these 7,000 steps with nothing but silence where my voice used to be. They call them holy men. Pilgrims climb for weeks just to hear them speak a single word. Jarls send messengers begging for their wisdom. The people of Skyrim look up at that distant monastery wreathed in clouds and see something sacred, something pure, something above the petty struggles of mortal life. I know better. I know what lives in that silence. I know what their meditation truly costs. I know why they never come down from that mountain, and I know what they let happen while they sit in their stone halls, contemplating the shape of words that could save thousands. My name does not matter. I left it behind when I was 14 years old, the day I climbed those steps. What matters is what I saw, what I learned, what I carry now like a stone in my chest that will never dissolve. If you want to understand the dark truth about the Greybeards, you must first understand what the voice really is. Not the legend, not the songs. The reality that vibrates in your skull when you speak a word that was never meant for mortal tongues. Before High Hrothgar, I was just a boy in Ivarstead. My father worked the mill. My mother kept a small garden that never grew quite enough. We were poor, but we had each other. And in the shadow of the throat of the world, that felt like enough. I discovered my gift when I was 12. A wolf had cornered my younger sister near the river. I remember the terror, the certainty that I was about to watch her die. And then I screamed. Not a normal scream, something else. Something that came from deeper than my lungs, deeper than my chest. The word I spoke, I did not even understand it. But the wolf flew backward, as if struck by a giant's fist. It hit a tree so hard the trunk cracked. My sister was safe. And I had just changed the course of my entire life. Word travels fast in a village like Ivarstead. Within a week, the whispers had reached the top of the mountain. Within a month, 2 men in grey robes descended those 7,000 steps for the first time in living memory. They did not need to demand. They did not need to threaten. When the Greybeards descend from High Hrothgar to speak with your family, no one refuses. The weight of tradition, the fear of divine displeasure, the honor of being chosen, it all crushes any thought of saying no. My parents wept, but they agreed. What else could they do? When a Greybeard speaks, you listen. Not because you choose to, because the words themselves carry weight that presses against your mind like a physical force. They told me I had been chosen. They told me I carried a gift that must be shaped, or it would destroy me and everyone I loved. They told me the path of the voice was the only path that could save my soul. I was 14 years old. I believed every word. My mother wept when I left. My father could not even look at me. My sister, the one I had saved, stood in the doorway of our little home and watched me climb those first steps with an expression I did not understand then. I understand it now. It was grief. The 7,000 steps are a test before the test. They do not tell you this when you begin climbing. They do not tell you about what waits along the way. The pilgrimage takes most travelers 3 to 4 days, stopping at the waypoints, reading the carved emblems that tell the story of Jürgen Windcaller and the founding of the Greybeard Order. For me, as a chosen aspirant, there were no stops. The 2 Greybeards who escorted me did not rest. They did not eat. They simply walked, their grey robes somehow untouched by the howling wind, their bare feet leaving no prints in the deepening snow. By the second day, I understood why they did not speak. A single word from their lips, even a whisper, would have killed me. The power they contained was not something they could turn on and off. It was always there, always pressing against the cage of their silence. They had trained for decades to contain it, and still I could feel the air tremble around them. On the 3rd day, I began to notice the markers. Not the emblem stones with their carved wisdom, but other things. A scrap of cloth frozen to a rock, a walking stick half buried in snow, a shape in the distance that might have been a fallen pilgrim, or might have been a trick of the ice and wind. They say people die on this climb. I never asked if the shapes I saw were real. I never wanted to know for certain. The Greybeards did not slow. They did not look. Whatever had happened to those who came before, it was not their concern. The mountain takes who it takes. The worthy arrive. The unworthy do not. That was the first lesson. The path demands sacrifice. Those who fail along the way have simply proven themselves unready for what waits at the summit. I stopped asking questions after that. High Hrothgar is beautiful in the way that a glacier is beautiful. Cold, ancient, utterly indifferent to your suffering. The stone walls have stood for eras. The wind that howls through the courtyard has been howling since before men walked this land. And the silence, the suffocating silence that fills every room, every hallway, every meditation chamber, is older still. I was not the only aspirant. There were 4 of us that year. 3 young men and 1 young woman, all pulled from villages across Skyrim because we had shown the spark of the voice. We were housed in cells, small stone rooms with a single cot and a single candle, no windows, no decoration, nothing to distract us from the path. Master Arngeir was the only one who spoke to us. The others, the older Greybeards whose names I never learned, communicated through gestures, through written notes, through the weight of their presence. Arngeir told us this was mercy. If the senior masters spoke even a greeting, our bodies would not survive the impact of their words. I thought he was exaggerating. I learned otherwise within my first week. One of the other aspirants, a boy from Whiterun named Hjormund, made the mistake of approaching Master Wulfgar during morning meditation. He wanted to ask a question, something simple about the schedule, the meals. I do not remember. He got within 3 feet of the old master before Wulfgar turned his head. Wulfgar did not speak, he simply exhaled. The sound was like nothing I can describe. It was not a shout. It was not even a word. It was just breath, carrying the weight of the voice behind it. Hjormund flew backward. He hit the stone wall so hard I heard his bones crack even from across the courtyard. He lived, barely. The monks who tended to the injured, those who had learned over centuries how to treat the strange wounds caused by the voice, worked on him for 3 days. When he emerged, he could not walk. The bones in his legs had been shattered so thoroughly they could never fully heal. They sent him back down the mountain on a stretcher. Arngeir gathered us after. He explained, in that calm, measured voice that I would come to hate, that Wulfgar had not meant to harm Hjormund. He had simply failed to contain himself fully. The boy had startled him. It was an accident. Accidents happen, Arngeir said. The voice is not a tool to be mastered, it is a force to be survived. I began to understand then. The Greybeards were not teachers. They were survivors. They had lived long enough with power inside them that could level cities, and their entire existence, every moment of every day, was dedicated to not destroying everything around them. Their peace was not serenity. It was a cage. Training began in earnest after Hjormund left. Every day, from the moment the pale dawnlight crept over the mountains until the darkness became absolute, we practiced, not speaking, containing. The first exercise was silence. Complete, absolute silence. We would sit in the meditation chamber, a circular room of bare stone with a single shaft of light descending from a hole in the ceiling, and we would focus on not speaking, not whispering, not even breathing too loudly. This sounds simple. It is not. When you carry the voice inside you, silence is agony. The power wants to be released. It pushes against your throat like a living thing, demanding expression. Some days I sat for 12 hours with my jaw clenched so tight that my teeth cracked. Other days I would feel the words rising unbidden, syllables of the dragon tongue forming on my lips without my permission, and I would have to bite down on my own tongue until I tasted blood. The woman from our group, her name was Valdis. She failed in the 3rd month. She could not contain the pressure any longer. In the middle of a meditation session, with all of us sitting in perfect stillness, she opened her mouth and spoke a single word. The word was not even Thu'um. It was just a word. Just a normal, human word. But the voice was behind it, the power that lived in all of us. And that single syllable cracked the stone floor beneath her. The vibration traveled through the room like a wave, and I felt my bones shake, my vision blur. The senior Greybeards did not punish her. They did not need to. The shame on her face was punishment enough. She was sent to a smaller cell, a tighter space where the walls would absorb more of any accidental outburst. I did not see her for 3 weeks. When she emerged, there was something hollow in her eyes, something that had been burned out of her by isolation and self-loathing. They taught us to feel the voice inside ourselves, that burning pressure in the center of our chests that wanted nothing more than to explode outward. They taught us to recognize when it was building, when it was pushing against our control. They taught us meditation techniques, breathing exercises, mental disciplines designed to keep the power locked away. The mental disciplines were the worst. They made us visualize the voice as a caged beast, something feral and dangerous that lived in our core. We had to imagine the bars of the cage, the locks, the chains. We had to make these mental constructs so real that they would hold even when we slept, even when we dreamed. I spent months building my cage, layer by layer, until the power inside me felt distant, muffled, like a scream heard through thick walls. But they also taught us to speak. This was the contradiction at the heart of their order. The voice was too dangerous to use, too devastating to unleash upon the world. And yet they trained us to use it. They stood us in the courtyard, surrounded by thick stone walls reinforced with ancient magic, and they taught us words. Fus, force. Such a simple word. 3 letters, 1 syllable. When I spoke it for the first time, really spoke it with the power behind it, I killed a goat. The animal was supposed to be there. They had placed it in the courtyard specifically for this purpose. A target, a measure of our progress. I was supposed to push it back, maybe knock it off its feet. Instead, my voice tore through the creature like it was made of wet paper. I watched its body come apart. I watched pieces of what had been a living thing scatter across the ancient stones. I smelled blood and something worse, the acrid stench of matter that had been struck by something beyond physical force. I vomited. I fell to my knees and emptied my stomach while the other aspirants stared at me with expressions that mixed horror with recognition. They had all done the same thing. Arngir approached me afterward. He placed one hand on my shoulder, and I flinched, half expecting his touch to carry the same destructive weight as his voice. "This is the burden you carry now," he said. "This is what it means to speak with the voice of the dragons. Every word you utter can end life. Every syllable can unmake what took nature years to create. This is why we choose silence. Not because we are holy, because we are weapons, and weapons that think themselves tools are the most dangerous of all. I should have left then. I should have walked down those 7,000 steps and returned to Ivarstead and never spoken again. But I was young, and I was proud. And some part of me, some terrible part, had felt something when my voice tore through that goat. Power. I stayed. The years passed. I learned more words. Row, balance, dar, push. I learned to combine them, to chain them into shouts that could reshape reality itself. I learned the history of the voice, how Kain had given it to mortals so they could fight back against the dragons, how the ancient Nords had used it to conquer and destroy, how Jurgen Windcaller had seen the carnage at Red Mountain and decided that the voice must never again be used for war. They taught us about the Dragon War, about the age before the First Era when dragons ruled Tamriel as gods. The Dov, they called themselves, children of Akatosh. They did not merely dominate, they demanded worship. They built dragon cults, enslaved entire populations, treated mortals as cattle to be used and discarded. For centuries, humanity lived in chains, forged of fire and fear. Then Kain, goddess of the storm, took pity on her mortal children. She sent Paarthurnax, though I did not know his significance then, to teach humanity the voice. The tongues arose, warriors who could speak the language of dragons, who could shout with the power that had been used to enslave them. For the first time, mortals could fight back. The war was brutal. Centuries of conflict, cities burned, populations decimated. But slowly, inexorably, humanity pushed back. They developed new shouts, new techniques, new ways to fight fire with fire. They built the great Nordic kingdoms. They became conquerors themselves. And then came Red Mountain. This is where the dark truth begins. Not in the training, not in the danger, in the philosophy. Jurgen Windcaller was a survivor. He had fought at Red Mountain, had watched the tongues, the masters of the voice, march to war against the combined might of the Dunmer and the Dwemer. He had seen them fail, the greatest assembly of voices in mortal history, humbled and scattered. The Nords who had conquered so much with the power of their words, broken upon the slopes of a foreign mountain. Jurgen emerged from that slaughter convinced that the gods were punishing them, that the voice was meant for worship, not for war, that using it to kill, to conquer, to impose your will upon the world, was a perversion of Cain's gift. So he created the way of the voice, silence, contemplation, using the shout only to honor the gods, never to influence the affairs of men. The Greybeards would retreat to their mountain and speak to the sky, and they would let the world below burn if it must. I believed this. For a time, I sat in meditation for hours, for days, letting the voice build inside me until I thought my chest would burst, and then releasing it into the empty air, shouting at clouds while villages were raided and people died and dragons, actual dragons, began to return to Skyrim. We shouted into the sky every dawn. The practice was called the greeting. We would stand in the courtyard, faces turned toward the rising sun, and we would speak words of power into the empty air. The purpose, Arngir told us, was to honor Cain, to use the voice in its purest form, without intent to harm, without desire to control. But I saw what those shouts did to the sky. I watched clouds scatter. I felt the mountain tremble. I saw snow loosen on distant peaks and cascade down in miniature avalanches. This power, this voice we spoke into nothingness, could have defended kingdoms. Instead, it disturbed birds. The first reports came in my 8th year on the mountain. Helgen, destroyed. A dragon, a real dragon, had descended from the sky and burned an entire town to ash. Survivors were streaming across Skyrim, telling tales of fire and death, and a beast that shrugged off arrows and swords like raindrops. I remember where I was when I heard. I was in the library, copying texts that had been copied 100 times before, preserving words that no one outside these walls would ever read. A messenger had climbed the steps, half dead from the journey, to bring news to the Greybeards. I heard his ragged voice echoing through the halls. A dragon. An actual dragon. The creatures we had learned to fight, the enemies whose language we spoke, they had returned. And I felt, for the first time in years, a stirring of purpose. Finally, our training would mean something. I went to Arngir. I begged him. We could help, I said. We have the power. We speak the language of dragons. We could go down there and fight. He looked at me with those calm, ancient eyes, and he explained why we would do nothing. The affairs of men are not our concern, he said. If we intervene, we become part of the cycle of violence that has plagued this world since the dawn of time. We become conquerors. We become tyrants. The voice corrupts all who use it for power, no matter how noble their intentions. But people are dying, I said. People are always dying, he replied. This has been true since the first mortal drew breath, and it will be true until the last mortal breathes their final sigh. We cannot save everyone. We cannot save anyone, not truly. All we can do is preserve the purity of the voice and trust that the gods have a plan beyond our understanding. I wanted to scream. Not with the voice, just with my own human lungs, my own human rage. People were burning alive in their homes, and we sat on our mountain, speaking words of power into the empty sky, and we called this holy. But I was still obedient then, still afraid of what I would become if I stopped believing in the way. So I stayed silent, and more dragons came, and more people died, and the Greybeards meditated and chanted, and did nothing. The woman's name was Fastred. She came up the 7,000 steps in my 9th year, not as an aspirant, but as a petitioner. Her village had been attacked by a dragon. Her husband, her children, her parents, everyone she had ever loved, incinerated in a single night. She had walked for 3 weeks to reach High Hrothgar. Her feet were black with frostbite. Her hands had lost 3 fingers to the cold. And still she climbed, because she had heard the legends, because she believed the Greybeards could help. I was the one who found her in the courtyard. She had collapsed just inside the gates, her body finally giving out after pushing so far beyond its limits. I carried her inside. I helped the healing monks treat her wounds, and when she woke, I was there to hear her plea. Her story came out in fragments. The dragon had come at sunset, bronze scales that caught the dying light, wings that blotted out the sky. Her children had been playing in the yard when the first fire descended. She saw them burn. She heard them scream. She could not reach them in time. Her husband tried to fight. He grabbed a pitchfork, a farming tool against a creature the size of a longhouse. The dragon did not even need to breathe fire. It simply looked at him and spoke, and his body came apart in mid-air. The voice, she did not understand it then, but I did. A dragon had shouted her husband to pieces while she watched. She had hidden in a root cellar. She had pressed her hands over her ears while her village died above her. She had emerged to ash and silence and the distant sound of wings receding into the night. And in that moment of total destruction, she had remembered the legends. The men on the mountain, the masters of the voice. She did not ask us to kill the dragon. She was smarter than that. She asked us to teach her. She asked us to give her the voice so she could defend what was left of her people. She would do the fighting. She would take the risk. She just needed the power. Arngeir refused. He explained, gently, that the voice was not a gift to be handed out to those who sought vengeance. He explained that her rage, however justified, would corrupt the sacred words. He explained that the best thing she could do for her people was accept the will of the gods and find peace. She looked at him. This woman who had lost everything, who had mutilated herself climbing a frozen mountain just to ask for help, and she said something I have never forgotten. "You are not holy men," she said. "You are cowards dressed in grey robes, hiding behind philosophy because you are too afraid to use the power you hoard. My children burned, my husband burned, and you sat up here in your stone palace and did nothing. And you will continue to do nothing, because it is easier to let the world suffer than to risk your precious purity." They escorted her out. Not violently, just firmly. Grey-robed monks guiding her back through the gates, back to the steps, back to the long descent that would likely kill her given the state of her body. I watched her go. I watched her stumble down those first steps, her ruined feet leaving bloody prints in the snow, and I felt something crack inside me, some foundational belief that I had been building my entire life upon. She was right. We were cowards. The breaking point came in my 10th year. Another dragon, another attack, this one close. A creature the color of bronze had descended on a small settlement just below the mountain, a collection of farms and huts that served as waypoints for pilgrims. From the courtyard of High Hrothgar, we could see the fire. We could hear the screams, faint but unmistakable, carrying on the wind. I went to Arngeir one final time. I did not beg. I did not plead. I simply stated facts. There is a dragon killing people within sight of our walls. I can see the flames from where I stand. I have the power to stop this. I have trained for 10 years. I know words that could bring that creature down from the sky. And Arngeir, calm as always, serene as always, told me no. But this time, he added something else. He told me about Paarthurnax. "Paarthurnax," he said, "is our leader. He lives at the peak of the throat of the world, above even High Hrothgar. He has been our teacher for centuries, guiding us in the way of the voice. And Paarthurnax," Arngeir said, "believes as we do. He believes in non-intervention. He believes in silence. He believes in watching and waiting and trusting the patterns of the world." I asked what Paarthurnax was. Arngeir smiled. It was the first time I had ever seen him smile, and there was something terrible in it, something almost pitying. "Paarthurnax," he said, "is a dragon." I did not believe him at first. I thought it was a test, or a metaphor, or some kind of philosophical puzzle I was meant to solve. But he kept talking, and the truth kept getting darker. Paarthurnax was not just any dragon. He was ancient. He had fought alongside Ulduin, the World Eater, during the Dragon War. He had helped enslave humanity. He had burned villages and slaughtered tongues, and enforced the brutal tyranny of dragonkind upon the mortal races. And then he had changed, or so he claimed. Kine herself had called upon him to teach mortals the voice, to turn against his own kind and help humanity fight for freedom. He had betrayed Alduin, had enabled mortals to defeat the dragons and free themselves. After the war, he had retreated to this mountain, had become the teacher and guide of the Greybeard order, had spent millennia in meditation and contemplation, seeking to overcome his nature. I listened to Arngeir explain this, and something began to form in my mind. A suspicion, a terrible clarity. The way of the voice, I began to suspect, was not really about honoring Kine. It was not about purity or holiness, or any of the things they had told me. It felt like one dragon's attempt to convince himself that he was no longer a monster. Paarthurnax could not trust himself with power, so he had embraced a philosophy that demanded no one use power. He could not trust himself to intervene in the world, so he had guided an order dedicated to non-intervention. He was terrified of what he might become if he started killing again, started dominating again, started giving in to the instincts that had driven him for thousands of years. And we, the Greybeards, we were part of his experiment. his proof, his attempt to demonstrate that the voice could be contained, controlled, rendered harmless. Perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps Paarthurnax's transformation was genuine, his guidance truly holy. But sitting in that courtyard, listening to dragons burn villages in the distance, I could not believe it. We were not holy men. We were a dragon's cage for himself, and we were letting people die to maintain his vision of redemption. I descended the mountain that night. I did not pack. I did not say goodbye. I simply walked out the gates of High Hrothgar and began climbing down those 7,000 steps with fire still glowing on the horizon and screams still echoing in my memory. The cold was brutal. The path was treacherous. I had grown soft in a decade of sitting, of meditating, of speaking only in controlled bursts in protected courtyards. My feet bled. My hands went numb. I passed the same emblem stones I had passed as a child, but now I read them differently. Now I saw them as monuments to a lie, each carved tablet celebrating a philosophy designed by a monster to excuse his own cowardice. I reached the burning settlement by dawn. There was nothing left. The dragon had moved on, sated or bored, and behind it lay only ash and corpses. I walked through the ruins, looking for survivors, finding none. The heat was still intense. The smell was indescribable, that same acrid horror I remembered from my first training kill, but 1,000 times worse because these had been people. I found a child's doll, half melted, still clutched in a hand that no longer existed, and I screamed, not with the voice. I could not use the voice. The training had worked too well. My decade of conditioning meant that even in my grief, even in my rage, I could not unleash the power inside me. The words caught in my throat, contained by reflexes I did not want, shaped by years of meditation into something harmless and impotent. I had the ability to fight dragons. I had words of power that could shake the sky, and I could not use them, because a dragon on a mountain had convinced me that using them was wrong. I tried again and again in the days that followed. I stood in empty fields and attempted to shout. I felt the power building, felt it rising from my core, felt the words forming on my lips, and every time, at the last moment, I flinched. Some wall they had built inside my mind, some reflex I could not overcome. The guilt, the fear of corruption, the endless lessons about the danger of using the voice, it all rose up and choked the words before they could escape. I went to other teachers. I sought out the few tongues who still practiced the old ways, the warriors who had not surrendered to Jürgen Windcaller's philosophy. They tried to help. They taught me techniques, showed me meditations designed to break through mental barriers. Nothing worked. Not yet. The conditioning was too deep. Decade upon decade of training, meditation upon meditation, lesson upon lesson about the danger of the voice, the corruption of power, the necessity of restraint. It was not just a philosophy I had learned. It was a reflex. It was instinct. The cage I had built in my own mind was too solid, too perfectly constructed. Every time I reached for the voice, my own thoughts betrayed me. I even found a word wall once, deep in a Nordic ruin. I felt the word calling to me, ancient and powerful, offering itself freely. I walked right up to it. I let the knowledge flow into my mind. I learned a new word, a shout I had never been taught at High Hrothgar. And still I could not bring myself to speak it. The voice, I discovered, was easy to gain and nearly impossible to free from the prison of your own conditioning. I am 40 years old now. I live in a small house on the outskirts of Riften, far from the throat of the world, far from the steps I once climbed with such hope. I have not spoken aloud in 11 years, not because I have taken some vow of silence, but because I am afraid of what might come out if I open my mouth. The power is still there. I feel it every day, pressing against my chest, demanding release. The words swirl in my mind when I sleep, when I wake, when I sit in silence and stare at walls. I know enough shouts to level a city. I know enough Thu'um to challenge any dragon that dares descend. And I cannot bring myself to use any of it. The Greybeards did not just teach me the voice. They broke something in me. They rewired my thinking so thoroughly that the very act of shouting, of using the power I was given, feels like a betrayal of everything I learned. Every time I try, I hear Arngyr's calm voice explaining why it would be wrong. Every time the words begin to form, I see Paarthurnax's shadow looming over the order, and the guilt rises up to choke me. It is not that I cannot shout. My throat still works. The words still form. The power still builds. It is that I cannot bring myself to release it. The mental walls they built are too strong, the conditioning too deep. Every time I reach for the voice, something inside me flinches away, and the moment passes, and I am left standing in silence once more. Maybe one day I will break through. Maybe one day the rage will outweigh the training. But 11 years have passed, and I am still waiting for that day. They are still up there, you know. The Greybeards still sit in High Hrothgar, still meditate, still speak only to the sky. Alduin returned. The World Eater himself descended upon Skyrim, and they refused to fight. They refused to descend. They refused to act directly against the threat that could have ended the world. The Dragonborn came, the one the prophecies spoke of, and they taught that hero to shout, and then they stepped back and let them face the apocalypse alone, because that is what the Greybeards do. They train you, they shape you, they give you power beyond imagining, and then they teach you never to use it, never to help directly, never to intervene in a world that is burning while they watch from their frozen throne. People call them holy men. People climb those 7,000 steps to bask in their wisdom. I look up and see a prison. I see an order shaped by a dragon who could not face his own nature. I see men who have convinced themselves that inaction is virtue, that watching suffering without responding is somehow holier than getting blood on your hands. The cold I feel, that cold I mentioned at the beginning, that cold that lives in my bones and my blood and my breath, it is not from the mountain. It is from understanding. It is from knowing what they are and what they did to me, and what they continue to do to every aspirant foolish enough to climb those steps. The Greybeards are not protectors. They are not guardians. They are not even teachers. Not really. They are prisoners who have learned to love their chains, and they want you to love them too. I think about Fastrad sometimes, the woman who lost everything, who climbed on frozen feet to beg for help. I wonder if she survived the descent. I wonder if she found another way to protect what remained of her people. I wonder if she ever stopped hating the men in grey who turned her away. I think about Hjormund, shattered by a single breath, sent back down the mountain unable to walk. I think about the other aspirants I trained with, the ones who stayed, the ones who are still up there now, speaking to clouds while the world struggles. I think about all the people who died in Dragonfire, in all the years the Greybeards watched and waited and did nothing. I think about the villages burned, the families destroyed, the children who melted like that doll I found in the ashes, and I wonder if any of it was worth it. I wonder if Paarthurnax's redemption, if his desperate need to prove himself changed, was worth the oceans of blood spilled by mortals who could have been saved. I do not have an answer. All I have is silence, and cold, and the words that burn in my chest with nowhere to go. If you are reading this, and you are thinking of climbing those 7,000 steps, if you are thinking of seeking wisdom from the Greybeards, let me offer you this one piece of advice. Turn back. Find another path, because the voice they offer is not a gift. It is a trap dressed in grey robes, perched on a frozen mountain, teaching you to be useless while calling it enlightenment. And by the time you understand the truth, it will be too late. It was too late for me. I pray it is not too late for you.